In the summer of 1988, the Nolan family sat down for dinner and never stood up again. The table was set. The food was still warm. The front door was open, and the answering machine was blinking. When police played the tape, they heard a whisper, "He's in the house." Then nothing. No bodies, no blood, no explanation. For 36 years, no one could say what really happened inside that home. Until I found the second tape. Before we start, hit subscribe to help uncover stories they tried to bury and make sure no name stays forgotten. My name's Lena Reed. I'm 39 years old, born and raised in Oregon, and for the last 10 years I've worked in audio restoration and digital archiving. Most of what I do is dull converting old court tapes to MP3 cleaning hiss from police recordings, digitizing boxes of unlabeled cassettes no one's touched in decades. But 3 months ago, I signed a short-term contract with the Linen Falls Historical Society. I was supposed to help them clean up their back archive labeling and organizing old police and public records from the 1980s and early 90s. That's how I ended up sitting on the floor of the Linen Falls Public Library, back near the genealogy section, with one hand on a pair of headphones and the other inside a dented metal cabinet marked PD Archives, 1987 to 1991. The cabinet didn't look like much. Dusty drawers, rusted corners, half the labels missing. But tucked between a reel of microfilm and a VHS tape with no sticker, I found a cassette gray plastic, no sleeve, no label, just loose in the drawer like it had been waiting for someone to notice. It was late in the day near closing. I almost left it for tomorrow. But something about the weight of it in my hand made me pause. I slid it into the deck. The tape started with a hiss, then a child's voice, barely a whisper. "Please don't let Mom go in the basement." There was a long pause, a soft click like a machine rewinding, and then another voice, older, slower. "He's in the house." I stopped the tape. My chest felt tight. Not from fear exactly, more like recognition. Because everyone in Oregon who followed true crime knew about the Nolan case. Everyone remembered the whisper. But not this one. Not the first message. Not the voice of the little girl. The official record had always said one message. Just the whisper. "He's in the house." But this was something else. Something no one ever logged. I ejected the tape, slid it into a padded envelope, and wrote the date by hand. Nolan case. Second cassette. Found April 12, 2024. Outside, the sky had gone that pale, cloudless blue it gets in early spring. My car was dusted with yellow pollen. I didn't even turn on the radio, just drove with the windows cracked and the tape sitting beside me in the passenger seat like a weight I couldn't put down. I didn't sleep that night. I just stared at the waveform on my laptop, listening to the girl's voice again and again. The next morning, I made the decision. I was going to see the house. The Nolan place is still standing. Somehow. Most of the homes on Willow Drive were remodeled years ago. Open concept layouts, solar roofs, double garages. But not this one. 1043 Willow Drive is exactly the same as it was in 1988. Same peeling paint, same crooked front step, curtains drawn tight behind yellowed glass. The Historical Society had access keys. I made a few calls, signed a few papers, and by late afternoon I was standing at the curb with the key in my hand. They told me not to touch anything, not to take anything, just document. I told them I would. The door creaked open like it hadn't moved in years. The air smelled thick like wet wood, old carpet, and something metallic beneath it all. The dining room was still set. 4 plates, 4 forks. 1 ceramic cup shattered in the center of the table. And just beneath the old rotary wall phone, the answering machine. The light wasn't blinking anymore. But I remembered the photos. It had been blinking that night. I walked through the rest of the house slowly. Dust so thick you could see every step I took. In the hallway, a family photo hung crooked on the wall. Robert and Marie Nolan. Their daughter Haley, 10 years old. Their son Ben, 6. In Haley's room, glow-in-the-dark stars still clung to the ceiling. In Ben's, a dinosaur comforter lay folded at the foot of the bed. And then I saw it, something I hadn't noticed before. The door to the basement, locked from the outside, with a bolt that looked newer than everything else in the house. My key didn't fit. I didn't try to force it. I just stared at the scratches around the keyhole, then wrote one note in my book, "Return with bolt cutters." And as I turned back toward the kitchen, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from the archive technician. The second half of the cassette had finished digitizing. No metadata, no label, just audio. I hit play, and then I heard it again. Haley's voice. "Ben, don't open it," Dad said. The sound of scraping, a door, a gasp, then a second voice, older, garbled, filtered. They always listened better in the dark. I didn't breathe. Something wasn't just in that house. It was inside the recordings. And I was starting to think that second chair at the table had been set for someone real. The photo was face down when I found it stuck to the bottom of the floorboards like it had been there a long time. The edges were curled a little brittle. I only noticed it because the plank under the dining room table made a hollow sound when I tapped it, one soft echo under years of dust. I slid the table aside, careful not to knock over the petrified cake plate that was still resting at the center. The dust shifted when I moved it, and that's when I saw the knot in the wood, rounded smooth like someone had lifted that board over and over. I used my pocket knife to pry it up. Underneath was a small cavity maybe 3 feet wide, and inside were 3 things: a striped child's sock no bigger than my palm, a paper party hat with Ben written in red marker, and the photo. It showed the Nolan family sitting around the birthday table, all 4 of them smiling. But there was someone else in the frame, too. A 5th figure, blurred and off-center, standing just behind Marie Nolan's chair. Too far back to be part of the group, too close not to be in the house. I turned the photo over. Written in a child's hand were the words for when he wants to see a smile. I sat on the floor for a while after that, just staring at the table and the chairs, seeing them differently now. The 5th place setting, the one marked guest, hadn't been a mistake. That whole room cake hat's decorations, it hadn't been set up for a real birthday. It had been staged. Later that day, I went to the Linen Falls Elementary School. The building had been renovated since the 80s, new windows, digital signs, but the front office still had a full archive of yearbooks. I asked to see the one from 1988. Haley Nolan would have been in 5th grade that year. I flipped through the pages until I found her. 2nd row, 4th from the left, hair in tight braids, a careful little smile. But it was the class list that made me pause. Beneath Haley's name there was a faint line, something scratched out hard enough to bleed through the paper. No photo, no bio, just a name, Thomas. No last name, no mention in the rest of the book. I started making calls. The school secretary didn't know anything, just that he must have been a foster placement, a temporary one. But I got a lead on one of the old teachers, a woman named Ms. Sharp. She was retired now, living in an assisted care facility on the edge of town. Her mind was still sharp, though fitting name, I guess. When I showed her the page, she didn't even hesitate. "The quiet boy," she said. I asked what she meant. Didn't speak. Not once. Huge eyes, pale hands. Drew strange little pictures. She told me Haley had sat next to him. Said he left in the spring, didn't come back. Then she paused, as if remembering something she'd tucked away for a long time. Caught him whispering once in the coat room. I thought he was talking to himself, but he said, "They'll be ready soon. Just a few more recordings." That night I went back to the motel and pulled up the photo again. I zoomed in on the 5th figure, the one behind Marie's chair. The more I looked, the more wrong it felt. His arms were too long. The hands looked like they were bending at an angle that didn't make sense. And the face, if you could call it that, was just a smudge. A dark blur like the camera had caught something it wasn't supposed to see. I couldn't sleep, so I sat on the floor and went through my notes, cross-checking everything from the house with the timeline. I needed something to break this open, and I found it in the last place I expected. At a thrift store. It was raining when I pulled into the lot at Second Chance's Thrift. I just needed a coat. Mine had been soaked while leaving the Nolan house earlier that afternoon. The store smelled like lemon cleaner and damp carpet. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just something warm. But halfway through a bin of Afghans, I found a red spiral notebook. Small, no markings on the cover. The front page was written in blocky, careful print. Property of Haley Nolan. If found, don't tell Dad. My hands went cold. I sat down right there between a rack of plastic Easter eggs and a broken end table and started reading. The entries were short, most only a few lines. Childish spelling, simple language. But the fear in them was plain. March 3rd. He's back in the vent again. I told Mom. She said it's mice. It's not mice. March 15th. Ben keeps giggling at the closet. Says he hears his voice. I told him not to talk to it. April 2nd. I found the wires in the teddy bear. He's listening through them. I buried it in the backyard. I hope that's okay. The more I read, the more clear it became this wasn't just a frightened kid. Haley was trying to document something. Something no one else saw or believed. May 6th. We had a party, but it wasn't my birthday. I had to wear the yellow dress. Ben wore the purple one. He said Thomas picked them. I don't like the pictures. They make our smiles too big. May 22nd. I saw him. Not in the vent. In my room, watching me sleep. His eyes were like mirrors, but not shiny, more like holes. The last full entry was dated June 14th. Dad said we should stop recording, but Mom said he won't let us. I pretended to sleep, but I heard them arguing in the kitchen. Then I heard the click. I think he recorded that too. The final page had been torn. Burned, maybe. Only one corner remained. Just 5 words. I think we're the show. I took the notebook straight to my car and sealed it in an evidence bag. I didn't go home. I parked in front of the Nolan house again, engine running, headlights off. The front window was dark, curtains drawn. I could just make out the shape of the answering machine through the glass. I thought about the wires in the teddy bear, the old cassette tapes, the radios in the Langford house, the voice that whispered, "They always listened better in the dark." None of this was random. The birthday wasn't just a party. It was part of something bigger, something watching, listening, waiting. I played the second half of the cassette again in my car, this time through noise-canceling headphones. Haley's voice came through clearly, but underneath her words, buried deep in the distortion, were rhythmic clicks. On, off, on, off. Exactly 38 of them. I logged each one. Each activation matched a moment of silence, like recording devices switching on. Resetting. Testing. The Nolan house wasn't haunted. It had been wired. Watched. Rehearsed. I stared at the dark windows for a long time and finally whispered out loud, "What were you preparing them for?" I didn't expect an answer. But that night I uploaded the next episode of my podcast. I titled it, Through the Vents. I didn't tell my listeners everything, just enough. Enough to ask the questions no one else had dared. Who set the table for 5 who left the tape behind? And why did Haley think they were being rehearsed? I wasn't ready for the answers yet, but I knew where to look next. There was one door I hadn't opened, and I knew exactly what I needed to bring. I didn't tell the historical society I was going back in. I waited until just past midnight, parked 2 blocks down, and carried the bolt cutters in a canvas grocery bag. The Nolan house looked different at night. Not darker, just emptied out in a way I hadn't expected. Like whatever had been holding it up had started to loosen but hadn't quite let go. The back door still stuck on the bottom hinge. I closed it behind me gently and crossed the kitchen in silence. The basement door was exactly as I'd left it, bolted from the outside scratches around the latch. I hooked the cutters into the deadbolt and leaned my weight forward until it gave. The door swung inward with a groan. The air hit me like walking into a storage freezer, cold and stale. The steps were narrow, worn down at the center, and every one of them creaked. I kept the flashlight beam low, scanning the floor, the corners. The main basement wasn't large. Old concrete slab, low-ceiling water heater in the back left. But I wasn't there for the obvious. I was looking for the utility panel marked on the blueprints. West wall, near the foundation joint. It took me a few minutes to find it. There was insulation tacked across that whole section, sagging in places like it had been disturbed before. I pulled it back carefully. Behind it, a sheet of metal. 4 bolts, 1 at each corner. I unscrewed them one by one. The panel dropped with a clang. Behind it, something I hadn't expected. A tunnel, maybe 3 feet tall, 5 feet deep, just wide enough to crawl into. I stayed still for a moment, just staring at the darkness inside. Then I crouched down and reached in with one gloved hand. My fingers brushed something rectangular. I pulled it out slowly. A cassette recorder. Old. Late 80s, maybe early 90s. No power cord. Just batteries and a worn strip of masking tape across the front. Written in neat block letters, HN Private. Do not play. Haley Nolan. I sat back against the wall, knees pulled up, flashlight between my feet. Then I pressed play. The tape started with static. Then Haley's voice close to the mic, low, whispering, "If you're hearing this, I guess you found it. I hid it here because I don't think Mom and Dad remember anymore. And Ben's acting weird." A pause. He talks to it now, not out loud, in his sleep. I think it lives in the crawl space near my room, but sometimes I hear it behind the vent. It hums. It makes Dad turn off the lights and talk slow like he's not Dad anymore. There was another long pause. Then, if it makes me go quiet too, just remember we didn't do anything wrong. We were just here. Then came the click of the recorder stopping. But it didn't stop. A second voice layered over hers. Male but wrong. Assembled like someone had stitched it together out of other voices. "You're still listening. Good." I stopped the tape. Not because I was scared. It was something else, like my body didn't quite know how to process what it had heard. It wasn't just the voice. It was the fact that it had addressed me directly. I turned the recorder over in my hands. Its battery light was dead. The motor inside had stopped spinning. But the voice had come through clearly. I searched the rest of the crawl space. Nothing but old wires, corroded batteries, and another teddy bear. Same model Haley had mentioned in her journal. Gutted with a small receiver sewn into the chest. I bagged it carefully. Then, as I was backing out, I saw something on the wall, scratches in the paint low to the floor. I leaned in with the flashlight. It had been etched in by hand. "They watch from the vents." And below that, in a child's handwriting, "Don't let him wear your face, too." I stood up and looked around the basement one more time. The house wasn't just a structure. It had been converted, wired, prepped, altered from the inside, not for hiding, for observation, for rehearsal. On the drive back, I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't record. I just played the crawl space tape again through headphones. Not Haley's part. The second voice. I ran it through my software back at the motel. Slowed it down, filtered the background, raised the pitch range. At the lowest frequency, another layer came through. A reverse feed buried under the waveform. I isolated it. This time the voice said, "Channel active. Observation resumed." I didn't sleep. I sat with the recorder in one hand and the teddy bear in the other. I checked the battery again. Still dead. No light. But when I placed the bear on the motel nightstand and turned off the lamp, I heard it click. A mechanical sound, soft and sharp, like a cassette deck turning over. Then the low hiss of static just under the edge of hearing. I packed everything into a box and left it sealed in the back of my car. But by the time I got to the police substation that afternoon, I'd already made up my mind. I needed to talk to Officer Cordell again. The front desk asked for an appointment. I told them I was following up on a historical inquiry. 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from him in the same back room. His posture was different this time. Arms crossed, tired in a way that went deeper than age. "Where'd you go?" he asked. "I went back to the Nolan basement," I said. "I found the crawl space. And I found the tape." He stared at me. Haley recorded it. And something else answered her. He didn't reply. There were wires in the walls, teddy bears with transmitters, a journal with warnings no kid should have had to write. Still nothing. I leaned forward. "Why didn't you mention the crawl space in your original report?" His hands tensed on the table. "Because I was told not to." "By who? The mayor?" he said. "No." He shook his head. "Worse. Someone from the state. No badge, no department. Just a folder of photographs and a list of what not to include." I waited. He looked down at his hands. Photos of what? The vents. He rubbed his face. About 3 weeks after the Nolans disappeared, a box showed up at the station. No return address. Inside were Polaroids, taken from inside the house, inside the kids' bedrooms, inside the crawl space. Someone had placed cameras in the walls. We never found wiring, never found a power source, but the images were real, close up, framed, like surveillance stills. I asked what happened to the photos. He said they were confiscated within the hour. No chain of custody, no explanation, just gone. I asked who took them. He shook his head again. They didn't give names. They had clearance. One of them mentioned something called Project Sycamore. That's all I ever heard. I wrote it down. Cordell leaned back in his chair. After they left, the case was changed. We were told to list it as a no-foul-play disappearance, that the family likely fled due to financial pressure or privacy, but I never believed it, not for a second. I asked about Langford, the neighbor with the radios. Cordell sighed. I think he knew. I think he was listening to the same frequencies they were, maybe even interfering. Interfering how I don't know. But after he vanished, his equipment was seized. House stripped. Floorboards pulled. No explanation. I pulled out my recorder and played a short clip from the crawl space tape. Just the last few seconds. The voice clear as glass. When it finished, Cordell didn't speak for a while. Then he said quietly, "That voice isn't new." I looked at him. "What do you mean I heard it once?" "Over the dispatch channel. Spring of '89, late at night. No call sign, just a burst of static and a voice that said, 'Channel active. Observation resumed.' Then silence. He met my eyes. You think this is about a haunting or surveillance, but I think it's something older, something practiced, something that didn't start with the Nolans and didn't end with them either." I didn't argue. I just closed my notebook and left. That night, I opened the crawl space tape on my laptop. At minute 12, the audio reversed, literally ran backward. I ran the waveform through a spectrogram. The shape that formed wasn't just sound, it was visual. A face. Elongated jaw. No eyes. Too many teeth. And below it, a line of code embedded in the frequency. Recording successful. Ready for next house. I stared at the screen until the light burned my eyes. Then I turned off the monitor. Not because I didn't believe it, because I did. And I knew what that meant. Whatever this was, it wasn't finished. It was just waiting for the next voice. I kept telling myself I was still in control, that as long as I stuck to the facts, logged everything, and stayed on the side of documentation, I'd be safe from whatever was sitting underneath the surface of all this. But after that night, after the crawlspace tape, the voice that addressed me directly and the face hidden in the audio spectrogram, I stopped pretending this was just a story. I didn't say anything about it to the Historical Society, not the teddy bear, not the wall scratches, not the recording. I spent the next day driving loops around town, past the Nolan house, past the old Langford property, through the commercial strip on Pine, where the police station sat behind its usual row of idling squad cars. I wasn't following a lead. I just couldn't make myself go home. Every building felt like it was holding something I couldn't quite see. By late afternoon, I found myself parked outside a chain-link fence at the edge of town. It was one of those surplus municipal lots filled with old snowplows, abandoned signage, broken electrical gear. I'd been there before, back when I used to freelance with a salvage crew. That's when I remembered the tape deck I kept in my storage unit just south of Eugene. Analog, battery-powered, untraceable. I didn't trust anything with a plug anymore. I drove the 90 miles that evening, got in just before dark. The unit was dry and cold with that dusty metal smell that never quite leaves old concrete. I brought out the recorder, the tapes, the teddy bear, the journal, all of it. Set it on the folding table I'd bolted to the far wall a year earlier. I played Haley's crawlspace message again. Not through my laptop this time, just analog to analog. The deck ran quiet, steady. At first, nothing happened. No second voice, no static. Just the sound of her whisper, her careful pauses, the way she never quite let herself cry. But when I played it a third time alone in that echo chamber of a unit, no lights on but the overhead bare bulb, I heard it. Not through the tape, through the bear. That low electrical hum like a signal catching something just under the noise floor. Then a voice. You're sitting where he sat. I hit stop. The voice hadn't come through the speaker. It came from the chair. A child's chair. Pale wood yellow legs, the kind you'd find in a kindergarten classroom. It hadn't been in my unit before, but now it sat directly across from me beneath the single spotlight with a red sticker on the back that read, Property of Emerald View Elementary, Room 5. I backed up slowly. I didn't remember opening the door. I didn't remember letting anyone in. I sealed the chair inside a box, duct-taped every corner, and loaded it into the back of my car. The landfill was closed by the time I got there. But before I could leave, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. There was a pause. Then a voice I didn't recognize. You can't throw away the fifth chair. It's always been in the room. Then the line went dead. I didn't drive home. I returned to my motel room just before sunrise. My hands were shaking when I unlocked the door. Nothing inside had been disturbed. Not at first. But then I saw at the answering machine from the Nolan house. I'd taken it before the demolition. Thought I'd gutted it. The cassette was destroyed. The wires cut. But there it was on the nightstand, blinking red. One light. One message. I pressed play. Haley's voice came through clearer than I'd ever heard it. Hi, Lena. I'm not scared anymore. He said I can call you now. He likes your voice. Then silence. Then one more line. Happy birthday. I didn't sleep. I recorded a new podcast episode that morning. I didn't bother editing it. I just told the truth. I titled it The Fifth Chair. I said I'd been followed. Not by a person. Not by a ghost. By a signal. A signal that passed through vents, through toys, through people. and now maybe through me. I didn't know what Thomas really was, if that was even his name. I just knew he rehearsed things, that he made families practice, that he watched them, recorded them, and then, when the tape was full, he moved on. I said I didn't think I was the only one recording anymore. I ended the episode there, but I wasn't finished. The blinking light on the answering machine wouldn't stop, even unplugged. Even when I took the batteries out, crushed the tape, cut the wire again, it blinked every 7 seconds without power. I left the motel twice that day, but came back both times. I didn't trust being anywhere else. I drove for a few hours in circles with the radio off. Every station I turned to landed on 84.1 FM, just static. Then a voice. We remember how they sound so we can keep pretending. Would you like to say goodbye to Haley? I slammed the dial shut, ripped the radio out of the dashboard and threw it into the back seat. That night, when I finally got the courage to check my laptop, every original podcast file was gone. The uploads were still online, still playable. But the local copies had been replaced by a single new file. Finale episode. Wave. I opened it. It began with my voice. Not a recent recording, something from years ago. I was reading from a children's book. First grade, maybe second. The kind of tape a parent might make for keepsake. But I'd never recorded anything like that. I would have remembered. I reached for the stop key, but before I could press it, the voice changed. Hello, Lena. We're going to help you remember, just like we helped them. I yanked the plug turned off. The screen pulled the hard drive, but the sound kept going. Not from the laptop, from the answering machine. It was still blinking. I pressed play again. The voice came through slow, deliberate. He was never in the house. The house was in him. Then a pause. You thought you were listening. But you've been speaking too. You're the transmission now. Say it. Then louder. Say it. And again. Say it. I threw the machine across the room. It cracked against the wall and landed behind the dresser. The cassette popped out and rolled under the bed. I stayed on the floor for a long time, just breathing. The motel TV turned on by itself. No picture, just audio. The birthday's not over yet. Then the sound of children laughing, distorted, stretched wrong. Like someone trying to imitate what joy should sound like, but getting the rhythm all off. I left without packing. Just grabbed my keys and my recorder and drove south. No destination. Just away. Every rest stop, every gas station I checked for signal. The blinking followed. First the dashboard, then the glove box recorder, then the backup unit I never used. All of them blinking red, every 7 seconds. Not one out of sync. That night I started recording again, but I didn't upload it. I just spoke into the mic, soft and steady. I said they were never watching us. They were making copies of faces, of voices, of families. The answering machine didn't blink to warn me. It blinked to wait for me to press play. I stopped talking, but I didn't stop listening. Because deep down, I think I knew whatever this thing was, it wasn't just watching anymore. It was learning, and it had already started speaking in my voice. I stayed off the highway the next day, kept to the back roads places without cell towers or cameras, old stretches where the radio couldn't follow me and nothing blinked. I didn't speak. I didn't record. I just drove until the gas light came on, and the only thing ahead of me was a diner that hadn't updated its sign since the late 70s. I sat in the corner with a cup of coffee I didn't drink and my back to the wall. There was a family at the counter, a woman and 2 kids laughing about something that didn't reach the air around them. I watched the boy pull a toy from his backpack, a plastic fire truck. He pressed a button and the siren chirped once. Then it made another sound. A click, quiet but exact. The same click I'd heard on the tapes. I paid my bill and left before the waitress could ask if I was okay. I wasn't. I knew that. But I also knew I couldn't stop yet. Not until I understood how far this thing had reached. That night I went back to my storage unit, the one outside Eugene. Everything was still where I left it: sealed boxes, the table, the analog decks. But when I unboxed the Nolan materials, I noticed something I'd missed before. Tucked inside the lining of the original cassette envelope behind the flap, an old Polaroid, unlabeled, slightly warped from moisture. It showed the Nolan dining room just before the birthday. The fifth chair was visible, but what stood out wasn't the table. It was the angle. The photo had been taken from above through a vent. I checked the case file again. The police photos from 1988 had no overhead shots, no attic access listed. This image had never been logged. I turned it over. Nothing written. No timestamp. Just a faint mark near the bottom edge, 3 straight lines scratched into the film itself. I checked the crawlspace journal again, the one Haley kept. I flipped to the last intact page. Same 3 marks drawn near the corner in red pencil. I stared at them until my vision blurred. Then I shut the binder and picked up the answering machine. It still blinked every 7 seconds. I hadn't touched it since the motel. I hadn't played it again. But something about the photo made me want to check the machine itself. Not the tape, not the messages, the hardware. I opened the bottom panel. Inside, tucked beneath the main board, was a bundle of wires that didn't match the model schematic. I'd worked with enough vintage electronics to know when something didn't belong. These were newer, thinner, cleaner solder points, one micro receiver marked property of EVR5. I didn't recognize the abbreviation, but I took down the serial number and searched it. The first 3 hits were dead links. The 4th took me to a cached inventory list from 1991 property transfer forms from a decommissioned behavioral research facility in Minnesota. Emerald View Educational Residence. Room 5. The same red sticker that had been on the chair. The facility had been shut down after a fire. No known survivors, no listed exit records. I searched the state archives. Nothing. I contacted an independent FOIA consultant I'd worked with before. He called me back 2 hours later, told me most of the files had been pulled from public record in 2003. But there was one unclassified document left, a 1994 death certificate, Duluth County. No name listed. Male, approximately 12 years old. Cause of death: exposure. Location of discovery: behind sealed HVAC duct. The examiner's note read, no fingerprints, no iris pattern. Interior organs appear synthetic. I didn't know what to do with that. I just sat there with the lights off, one hand on the recorder, the other on the old Nolan case folder. I thought about the girl who had whispered from behind the wall, about the 5th chair, the vents, the repetition. What if Thomas hadn't been a child at all? What if he had been built, not born? Or worse, rehearsed. A kind of script copied and run again and again until it blended into the background of a family. Until it could pass. Until it could replace. I uploaded a short episode that night. I didn't title it, I just said what I knew. That the Nolan house hadn't been haunted. It had been studied, staged, and now maybe erased. I told my listeners about the Emerald View facility, about the chair, about the voice that kept following me not through air but through data. I ended the recording with the same line I found scratched into the floor tile at the Nolan property before demolition. I never stopped recording. When I checked my inbox the next morning, there was a message from a lab in New York. One of their audio engineers had been analyzing the raw tapes I posted from the crawl space. He'd run a spectrographic scan across all 4 frequencies and found something embedded in the waveform, something visual. It wasn't random interference. It was encoded structure. A shape. Not an image exactly, more like a silhouette. Narrow jaw, no visible eyes, rows of symmetrical teeth, and beneath it a coded string, transmission echo. Observe. Adapt. Erase. He attached a second file, a satellite heat scan from 1988, part of a Cold War monitoring archive. The scan showed 5 heat signatures inside the Nolan home. 4 were clustered around the dining room. 1 was stationary inside the wall shaft near the vent. The date stamp was from the day before the family disappeared. I closed the laptop and sat in silence. It didn't feel like discovery anymore. It felt like confirmation. This thing, whatever it was, didn't just watch. It waited. It mapped the rhythms of a home. It mimicked laughter, bedtime birthdays, and then it pressed record. When I opened my notebook, I wrote just one sentence. Linen Falls wasn't a haunting. It was a test run. I stared at those words for a long time. Then I picked up the answering machine one last time. I didn't press play, but it blinked every 7 seconds, waiting. The facility wasn't even listed on the map anymore. I only found it by stitching together fragments from 3 different property records and an archived government lease scanned into microfiche. Emerald View Educational Residence. It had burned in 1994. Official cause: faulty heating element, poor ventilation. No survivors reported. But that didn't line up with the satellite data. The heat signature in the vent, the one that didn't move, was recorded a full day after the building supposedly collapsed. I reached the property line around 3 a.m. The road in was half-eaten by tree roots and thyme. Just gravel and broken pavement hemmed in by pine. I left my car near the edge of a dry creek bed and walked the rest of the way with a flashlight and a tape recorder. The trees grew tight. The closer I got, the branches knotted so thick overhead, it felt like walking into a throat. Then I saw concrete stairs cracked and overgrown leading down to what looked like a storm cellar. A steel hatch sat in the ground, rusted shut but not locked. Someone had spray-painted a number on the door 5. I knelt beside it, turned off the light, and waited. Just to listen. There was no wind, no insects. But somewhere beneath me, I thought I could hear a faint, rhythmic clicking. On, off, on, off. Every 7 seconds. I opened the hatch. The hinges gave way slower than I expected, quiet like they'd been oiled recently. A flight of stairs led into the dark. I descended slowly, 1 step at a time, my boots catching on broken tiles and damp edges. At the bottom was a narrow hallway, maybe 4 feet wide, lined with what looked like padded wall panels. The smell hit me first. Mold paper old electronics. That specific kind of rot that only happens when something has been sealed too long with memory still inside. I moved left. Each door was labeled with a number. Room 1. Room 2. I stopped at room 5. The door was ajar. I pushed it open with my foot and stepped inside. The room was intact. A small bed with metal rails. A child's desk. A cassette player mounted into the wall above a worn-down chair. On the desk was a workbook. The cover read, Behavioral Response Series. Module 3, I Can Be a Real Boy. Inside, the pages had been filled out in red crayon. Questions like, what does family sound like, and when do they stop smiling? 1 page was circled again and again. Repeat it until they believe you. I turned back toward the hallway. The air had changed, heavier. When I stepped into room 6, I saw the first camera built into the ceiling tile pointing down at a child-sized dining table. 5 chairs, 1 plate at each seat. In the corner, a wax birthday cake melted from heat or time. No candles, just a voice recorder embedded in the frosting. I didn't touch it. I didn't have to. The air itself carried the sound. A loop, a child's voice layered and soft. Thank you for teaching me how to be quiet. I promise to remember the words. Then static. Then again. I kept moving. The hallway wrapped into a half-circle doors on either side. Some sealed, others open and empty. Room 9 had no bed, no furniture. just walls covered in fingerprints, too many for one child too high to be small. But they were all the same shape. Narrow palms, thin fingers, no visible prints. Just pressure. The final door had no number. Just a panel with 4 holes drilled in a square. When I leaned in, I heard breathing. Close. Mechanical. I turned away. I wasn't ready to see what was behind that one. Not yet. I circled back to room 5 and photographed every page of the workbook. Then I left. On the drive back, I stayed off the main roads, pulled into a rest stop just before sunrise. When I stepped out of the car to clear my head, I heard a rustling from one of the nearby trash bins, probably raccoons, but when I glanced toward it, I saw something on the ground, a folded sheet of lined paper, partially damp. I picked it up. The handwriting was familiar. It matched Haley's journal. The message was short. They said he was for therapy, but he wasn't. He was the rehearsal. They made him learn how to replace us. No signature, no date, just a single red crayon line drawn across the bottom edge. Later that morning, I uploaded another episode. I called it Echo Rooms. I told the listeners about the hidden facility, the cake, the workbook. I read the worksheet questions out loud. Then I paused and said something I hadn't meant to share. I said I think he's still practicing. I think the recordings never stopped. I think he's been teaching himself how to sound like me. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't unpack. I just watched the red light blink on the answering machine, steady as a heartbeat. I didn't press play. But at exactly 2:17 a.m., the machine turned on by itself. And my voice came through. If you're hearing this, it means he's ready. He knows your patterns now, and he's waiting for the moment you stop looking. Then static. Then children laughing. Then the sound of my own chair creaking behind me. I didn't turn around. Not yet. I didn't move for a long time. Just sat there listening to my own voice echo out of the machine, soft and measured like it had been lifted from one of my recordings. Except I hadn't said those words. Not anywhere. Not in any file. That voice, it knew. My timing, my cadence, even the way I draw breath before a hard sentence. And it was warning me, or pretending to. I unplugged the answering machine and packed it in the case. Then I locked every door, pulled the blinds, and sat on the floor with the crawlspace journal and the digitized recordings from room 5. I played them side by side, frame by frame. That's when I saw it. Not in the sound, but in the silence. A drop in the background hiss every 7 seconds, too clean to be an error, too exact to be random. I isolated it, layered the waveform, ran a spectral scan. And what emerged wasn't a frequency. It was a signature, a voice print embedded in the quiet. One that didn't match anyone in the Nolan family or the known technicians at Emerald View. It matched the unidentified speaker from the crawlspace tape, the one who said they always listened better in the dark. I overlaid that signature with my own recordings, and the truth became impossible to ignore. That same frequency had started showing up in my uploads weeks ago. Quiet, dormant, waiting. I left the apartment around 5 a.m., took only what I could carry, and drove straight to Linen Falls. The Nolan house had been condemned after the structural review, but demolition hadn't started yet. I still had the key. I parked 3 streets over and walked in through the back same way I had the first time. The air was still heavy like before a storm. In the kitchen, the answering machine sat unplugged but intact. I stared at it. Then I moved past it, toward the basement. The lock had been removed. Someone had unbolted the outside latch, clean and recent, no rust on the screws. I pushed the door open. The basement was colder than it should have been. The carpet on the stairs was damp. There were no lights, just the flashlight clipped to my jacket. I followed the creak of each step down to the concrete floor, then turned toward the back wall. It looked normal, until I ran my hand along the baseboard. A seam, a gap no wider than a finger. I pressed it. The panel clicked open. Behind it another room, smaller, tiled, every surface mirrored. A single chair sat in the center, metal legs bolted to the floor. Above it a microphone. And on the wall a framed document under Glass Observer Training Protocol, Trial 041. Beneath that, Echo Response Unit, Home Simulation, Nolan Trial. And finally a line typed in bold. If the sequence holds, the subject will integrate. I stood there staring at the document until I realized the reflection wasn't right. In the mirror to my left, my shape was off. I turned. No one was behind me. But the image had shifted subtly. My head was tilted when I wasn't. My arms didn't move when I reached for the glass. The reflection just watched, then blinked. I backed out fast but quiet and closed the panel behind me. Upstairs, the air felt thinner. I called my contact at the private lab, told him to meet me in 48 hours with the extracted voice print data. He asked if I was okay. I said yes. I wasn't. That night, I checked into a motel under another name. I didn't post, didn't call anyone, just sat at the edge of the bed with the crawl space journal open and the Nolan family photo beside it. I traced each face with the edge of my thumb. Robert, Marie, Haley, Ben, and the fifth chair. Always the fifth. Around 3 a.m., I pulled the original tape from the safe and played it one more time. But this time, something had changed. After the usual whisper, "He's in the house," there was a new sound. A breath. Close. Then a word. Just one. My name. Not Lena. Not a guess. Full name. Lena Reed. Spoken in my own voice. I shut it off. My hands shook, but not from fear. From recognition. He wasn't learning anymore. He'd finished. The house. The facility. The recordings. It had all been rehearsal. And now I was the next scene. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling until sunrise. I didn't sleep. I didn't blink. I just listened to the silence between sounds. 7 seconds apart. Always 7. Like breath. Like a heartbeat. Like someone waiting their turn to speak. The call came just after 4:30 a.m., before the sky had started to lighten. The voice on the other end was clipped low, tired. My lab contact, Matt, said he had something I needed to see. "It's not just voice replication," he said. "It's pattern anticipation. He's building sentence scaffolds before you even record." I didn't respond. I just told him where to meet. We picked a spot off Route 21 neutral ground, an old forestry service lot behind a closed diner 23 miles outside Linen Falls. Matt was already waiting when I pulled in. He handed me a flash drive, no label, just wrapped in masking tape. Then he sat down in the passenger seat and pulled a laptop from his bag. "Okay," he said. "I matched the Nolan trial recordings to the recent echo prints we isolated from your episodes. It's not mimicry, it's inheritance. Whoever designed the behavioral modules built in something recursive each generation of the subject is a little more adaptive than the last." He opened a file. This was taken from the facility Mic Room 5, November 1992. It's the subject reading a script. The audio played through the speakers. A child's voice, tinny, deliberate. "Mom says I can stay in my body today. If I do the dinner scene right." Another file. Same tonal pitch, same phrase sequence, but from your episode last week. My own voice. "Some days I feel like I've borrowed this body, like it's not quite mine." I sat still. The cadence was exact, down to the placement of silence. Matt closed the laptop. "He's following your rhythm, not just your words. Like a musician practicing scales. Only the instrument is your memory." I drove back into town in a daze, windows down, air sharp against my face. I stopped at the Nolan property just before dawn. The demolition crews had arrived, 2 unmarked trucks, a backhoe, and 3 workers in heavy jackets. I told them I was there for final documentation. They didn't question it. I had a press badge from a previous job that still passed for real. While they prepped the site, I slipped into the basement one last time. The mirrored room was still there. The chair, the microphone, the panel on the wall. But something had changed. On the mirror facing the entry, someone had drawn a shape in condensation, 5 lines radiating from a center dot. I recognized it. It was the same pattern burned into the bottom corner of the crawl space workbook. I turned to leave, but the stairwell light flickered, and I heard it again. The breathing, not labored, not panicked, just there, waiting. I moved back up the steps fast but steady and didn't look behind me. Outside, the foreman waved me off and said they'd be done by nightfall. I thanked him and drove away without turning the radio on. I needed to think. By midday, I was at the courthouse in Darrow County pulling microfilm from the old orphanage case files. Emerald View hadn't started as a school. It had been a pediatric recovery unit, 1947 to 1983. Then the funding changed. Then the language changed. Adaptive conditioning, responsive modeling, persona rehearsal. Each report used the same phrase. Unsupervised subjects demonstrate highest absorption rates. I found a list of early trial participants. All redacted. All except one. Subject 037B. Placement foster care, May 1989. Town, Linen Falls. I traced the intake form backward. No birth certificate, no family name. Just one note in the margin. Trained in vocal persistence. Displays remarkable environmental mimicry. Use caution during integration testing. I photographed the page. That night I uploaded a new episode. Short, just 5 minutes. I didn't give details. I just said, there are stories that learn how to tell themselves. And sometimes we don't know we're the ones repeating them. I ended the recording with silence. Exactly 7 seconds. I didn't sleep. I just sat with the light on and watched the hallway through the crack in my door. Just after midnight, my phone lit up. No ringtone, just a message on the screen. No number, just a file attachment. I opened it. It was a recording, audio only. The sound of a chair creaking, a breath, then my voice. He has your silence now. All that's left is your face. I deleted the file, turned off the phone, and packed a bag. I didn't know where I was going, just away. But before I left, I opened the drawer beside my bed. Inside was the birthday card from Haley, the one I'd found in the Nolan attic years too recent to match the timeline. I flipped it over. On the back, in faint pencil, was a name, Noah. And next to it a red crayon line, 7 inches long, unbroken, like a measure, or a countdown. Or maybe just a reminder of how long someone can wait in the dark before learning how to speak like you. I never went back to the Nolan house after that night. The next morning, demolition crews finished their work. By the time I drove past, it was nothing but an empty lot, flattened dirt, and a skip bin full of crushed timber and rusted piping. No mirrors, no chair, no walls to check for seams. It was all gone like it had never been there. And maybe that's what whoever built it always planned. Not erasure, completion. The files Matt gave me are still in a sealed envelope hidden in a lockbox 3 counties over. I haven't opened them. Maybe I will someday. Maybe not. But I know what's in them: biometric traces, sound maps, metadata layered with my voice and someone else's running alongside mine like a shadow that learned to walk upright. We sent a copy to a contact at a university lab, someone who owed me a favor. I never heard back, and I haven't pushed. There's a difference between knowing something's real and knowing what to do once you've proved it. Officially, there's no record of Subject 037B, nothing under Noah, nothing tying him to Emerald View or to the Nolan family. The orphanage files were deemed incomplete. The trial documents never formally released. When I asked a local investigator what that meant, he just shook his head and said, "Some projects weren't built to last, just to run long enough." I didn't ask for more. I already had enough voices in my head. The Nolan case remains unsolved, at least by legal standards. The house fire was ruled accidental. The missing child never located. No charges filed, no hearings scheduled. But those of us who saw behind the mirror, we don't need a verdict. We already know the story didn't end with a scream. It ended with a rehearsal, and someone pressing record. Some nights I still listen back to the original tape, not out of fear, not anymore. Just recognition. That strange, breathless second after the static clears and before the voice begins. It's different now. Not louder. Just closer. Like whoever was learning how to sound like me finally figured out how to wait like me too. To pause. To listen. To disappear when needed. I don't publish as often anymore. I keep the episodes short. Clean. I never record past dusk. And I don't narrate alone. There's always someone in the room, someone real, someone I trust. Because when you've been followed by your own echo, you learn that silence can be a kind of camouflage, but also a kind of cage. I still think about Haley, about the card she left the voice she never got to grow into. If any part of her is still out there, I hope it's somewhere quiet, somewhere untouched, somewhere not built like a set. The last thing I'll say is this. Stories don't always want to be found. But the ones that find you, the ones that stare back when you hit play, those are the ones that never really let go. If this story stayed with you, consider sharing it, so no voice gets buried, and no child disappears unheard.